Um, I need to put my phone on silent. Um, yeah. So what else? What I Hello. Okay, so I'll be sharing my screen so you can look at my notes, and then we'll email those. Yeah.
I would say before you start that since yesterday, I received some messages with questions about the topics we touched yesterday. I would like the present people to ask uh, things when we are all together, so we can discuss this. I think it's useful also for others to listen the answers. So if it's okay, write it down maybe in the chat box if you don't want to open your microphone or your camera, and we can discuss all your doubts.
For sure, yeah, yeah. Ask any questions at all times. You can also raise your hand if you actually want to speak up and put on your camera. I think there's an actual button you can click to raise your hand, and then yeah, feel free to ask questions at any point. So the first part we're going to talk about is how to find a photo story idea, obviously, because I think that um, before you start shooting, so a lot of us intuitively at the beginning, I think at the beginning of our practice, we're just photographing everything that we think is visually pleasing or is interesting to us somehow, without really thinking deeply what we do with these photographs. And then as time passes, we get to a point where we're like, well, okay, now what do I do with all these photos? So in order to actually do something with the photographs, I think that they need to eventually tell some kind of a story. And in order to do that, we need to locate kind of a structure or a base. What is the story about? So in order to do that, why I start with the idea that at the beginning we really photograph just everything and anything. So this really helps because you really, when you're looking for an idea, you should look through your archives, you should look through your photographs, and you should try to understand what is important to you. Like if you look into, let's say, a couple of years of your photos, eventually you're going to find a common thread or a theme that you seem to be photographing a lot. So do you like photographing people, certain kind of people, animals? Is there a repetitive object or subject? Is there some street or some houses or some particular light or some reflections? Or so basically looking through your archive so normally in our workshops, when we teach workshops, I give homework exercises where I ask people to go after the workshop and take some photographs of whatever. I want for this really spontaneous kind of um, energy to try to understand where the eye and where our students are leaning towards. And then when they come back with the photographs, we look at them and we try to find this common thread of where, what is the first thing that they're leaning towards, whether it's their comfort zone that forces them to take these photos or it's something that interests them. That's another thing. But looking at your own photos is probably one of the best sources of inspiration if you're really, really early on in your practice. But if you're slightly more evolved, perhaps, you're already kind of considering certain topics. Another thing to consider is access. So you should look around and think of who do you have in your life that has some interesting access, yeah, that can get you access to interesting people or topics. Is there someone in your family or friends who's working in an interesting job and can introduce you to somebody there? So you might not necessarily want to photograph your friend or family member, but through them, they could introduce you to a colleague or to somebody and open this access for you that that you otherwise wouldn't have. Like for example, it could be that the local, I don't know, nurse or something, so you could actually have access to the local hospital. And right now, having access to a hospital, for example, for me it would be probably quite hard to try to communicate with the administration, and it would be very difficult. However, if I knew somebody directly working in there, I could probably gain access through these kind of friendships and stuff. So access is a really interesting thing to consider when you're looking for a subject that you could develop. Um, the next thing that could help you, so if none of those things work, there is lots of things to try out. Is there a place that you like, um, and that you perhaps also have some connection to, that you could do a story about, that show it from different angles? So for example, the way to think about this is there is a street or a cafe or something, and you could try to portray it from different points of views. So you could portray it from the point of view of if you know the people who work there and all the different events that might happen there. On one night there might be for example, I can talk from experience, there used to be this kind of youth cafe. So on Monday nights, there would be a lady who would run a movie session for homeless people, and they would drink tea and watch movies and discuss. And then on a Tuesday night, there would be Brazilian dancing. And then on a Wednesday night, there would be something else. And on a Thursday night, there would be something else. And it was all really different. So, a street or a place or a job or something like that could also give you, if you just think about all the different things that are happening, it could give you probably an interesting topic or an interesting subject to start working on. Then, of course, there's always just other photographers and looking at their work. This would probably go uh, with the next one of the next ones I'll talk about. So look at other photographers. What are they doing? So what kind of stories are people telling? Like what kind of stories are they passionate about, or that they are thinking about? What kind of stories are people responding to? And then you could also pair that, not only looking through Instagram, but actual publications. So you could look into magazines or newspapers and you could see what's being published. Preferably, I would recommend doing that in other countries and then consider how you can localize it. So you're not really stealing an idea, right? What you are doing is you're taking a subject that's current that you can work with, but you're localizing it into your context. So you would still have the connections, you would still have a different background, you would still have different nuances to that story, but perhaps the story itself, you can just take it as a foundation. I think that also when you're a starting photographer and you're trying to understand where your interests are, this is a good way to practice and to find your voice and to find your passions, is looking at the stories that you resonate with other photographers and publications. So then another way to look at it is make a list of ideas that you would like to do if you had zero restrictions. So imagine you have this fantastic budget and like everybody's going to publish you and you have just like everything you ever wanted. So make a list of those story ideas and then look at them again and think of how you could possibly work them out. Perhaps you could blend it or modify the story in some way that would allow you to do the story just with the resources you have. But don't limit yourself on this, oh, I'll never be able to do that because I don't actually have all these resources. So you don't even start the process of developing it, not in your head, not on paper, not in anywhere. You just cut yourself. So make a list, really consider what are the resources you're looking for, and then just go for them. Try to consider how could you actually play out this idea. So that's another one. Another one is a little bit more simple, I think, but also could turn into a nice project, is consider if there is a group of people that you admire: grandmothers, nurses, teachers, I don't know, NGO workers, musicians, somebody. So who are people that you're really interested in, you think that they're doing something unusual or something important. So you could just do a series about particular group of people, so you have this instant connection because you care about this, and so it's a little bit easier to work on a subject that you care about. So it can be as simple as a group of people, grandmothers. You don't need to complicate it because there'll be somebody else who will resonate with that. So the same thing with the next one. Is there other questions that you think that are important to be highlighted with the camera? So questions could be political, they could be social, they could be ethical. I think the camera, even though sometimes you can say more with words than you can say with the camera, it's it can be more artistic and creative. You could be, more symbolical. It can be more about shapes or lights or colors or shadows or whatever it is. So if there's a question that really bothers you in societies, like why does poverty happen or why does something happen, you could actually illustrate a question or a concept rather than a specific person or a location or a time period or something. So there's like all these different ways to approach photography. um, Finally, the last one, I think, so there's so many of them, but for example, imagine your dream job. So, if you were, I mean, for me, okay, my dream job is photographer. I'll always be photographer. But imagine if for you, it's not photographer, maybe it's something else, but photography is just your way of expressing yourself, or maybe it is a photographer. So, do you have an idea for a project there? Is there something that you could do with that? Is there anybody that you know who's doing that job? Could you do that about them? So the most important thing to find an idea is to really have a reason for why you care about it, right? You can't do something purely from the point of view it's like, oh yeah, that's selling, that's trending, that's important for some reason. I don't know why, but it seems people care. So like really trying to identify, and I feel like any one of these options should be able to help you to identify this personal position, even though you can of course then treat the subject in a more sort of objective way once you find it, but it is you who will choose what you invest your time and energy into. So do you have any questions or any ideas or suggestions about the finding a story process? Did that trigger any thoughts or anything?
I would like to ask something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I started my MA here in the UK, the approach was very different from what I've been learning back in Italy. So there is a specific approach you recommend, or or just or just it's enough if we find what fits for us.
So just based on I mean, I think that a lot, I don't know if exactly for everybody, I could do the poll again, but I think that for most people who are just starting out, who are kind of like doing a practice for a while, but it hasn't been structured, it's been just this passionate, like, I love photography, I love to take photos, I love to interact with people, or I love nature, or whatever it is. So if you're looking for structure to begin with, I think that, and if you're not working for a media company where you get assignments and you're just doing what you're told, right? I feel like it's really important to understand what it is you care about and why do you care about it. Yeah. And the other thing is that I think these particular propositions that I'm making here, they're not. Oh, but I'm going to share the documents. You will get an email or with all of this. Okay, but I'll put it back on. I'm going to get back to it. um, so this is also a kind of a practical thing. When you're beginning these stories, they don't have to be. You don't have to work on them for 2 years or 3 years. It's rather a practice. It's like making little photo essays. So we're developing visual stories, right? So before you started writing books, well, some people might start writing with a book straight away, but most people begin with, first writing out the alphabet and then writing out some essays and then, contemplating more complex things. And that way we get to some level. So I'm not really sure what they taught you in university about the practice. What I recommend is figuring out how long you can sustain a topic. So this is the other thing, is that you need to try different topics in order to see how long can you really stick with it. Is this really something that will go on for 2 years or 6 months or 1 week even? Is one trip enough and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't think I want to keep going with that. So it really depends on where you are and with your practice and what you're trying to achieve with it, right? I mean, I know photographers who have worked on a single topic for almost 20 years, but at the same time doing newspaper assignments, which is every day a different story. And, you know, they might not even be really related to those stories. They're just doing a job. So that depends on what you're trying to achieve. That kind of makes sense? Alice? Amal? Cool.
No, sorry, the audio, I couldn't hear what, did you ask me something? I saw you speaking, but I
Ah,
couldn't hear very well.
oh, everybody else hear me well? I was answering your question.
Yeah, but the last part,
Ah,
you asked me something,
oh
I
no, yeah,
couldn't
I'm
hear.
asking if that I heard cool. I'm asking if that answers your question of, you know,
Oh,
how what
yeah, of course it
methodology
does.
is. I don't
Of course it
there's
does.
no methodology. There's just what can you sustain as an individual. You know, whatever methodology works for you is always going to be a really personal thing.
Yeah,
Um, so
thank you
okay,
for your, thank you for your answer.
we go back to my notes. Yeah, you see my screen again?
Mhm.
So again, not quite sure where everybody is with their practice at this moment, but I really recommend starting a notebook for and writing down all the ideas that might come to your mind. So for a really long time, I had like list and list and list and list of them. Of course, I worked on a tiny fraction of them, but it also helped me get all the stuff out of my head and kind of analyze whether, you know, whether it's a little bit like the creative process when you're brainstorming and you're trying to come up for a name for something, right? First you kind of get all the boring stuff, all the stuff that you've heard from other people, all the stuff that you've seen and read, and then slowly once you get all of that out, you start to get the, you know, the truly kind of personal stuff. So I really recommend keeping that notebook. It also just frees your mental space to contemplate things further and not just keep a list in your head you're constantly repeating. um, and yeah, as I was saying, look at magazines from other parts of the world and think about how you could localize a story. I think localization, there's so many, like yesterday we were talking about migration and refugee issues, and there were three completely unrelated different projects, completely different way of presenting, completely different way of thinking it. So there's definitely, you know, merit and value, I think, in taking stories that are already kind of been done many times, but if they've never been done in your locality, in your community, that could turn into a really interesting project, even if just for the local community, you know, a new way for them to see themselves and for you to see them. That's really nice. So yeah, you know, you can definitely borrow ideas to begin with. So that's kind of the first part, yeah, because I did a poll. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second again. I know that we have new people, so I'm going to relaunch the poll one more time because I'd still like to see where the others are. uh, oh, okay, I think. Can you please fill in the poll, everybody? Cool. Okay. So, I mean, the general situation is that, so now, I don't know, for some of you who joined a little bit later, do you feel like you would know where to start looking for ideas? Is there anything that you were like sitting there going, oh, yeah, hmm, that's an idea that I could develop? Anyone? Yes, no? Just put it in the chat if you feel like you have something, maybe or not.
Sorry, Kate, it's the same as before, right?
Yes. I'm just putting for the others who came in a little bit later. Yes, no ideas, no ideas. For those who said, I don't have any story ideas, or I have a hard time finding story ideas. Do you feel better now? Worse? Too many options? So these are the results, yeah? Okay, somebody said, oh, so somebody said, I have a hard time finding a story idea. And then everybody said, I have many ideas, but I don't know how to proceed. That's really funny. Okay.
Five people, all of them.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so let's say you have story ideas. What do we do next, right? So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to send you a document later on that I hope will help you. So let me show you this document that I will, sorry, I'm not able to show you many screens at the same time. It has to really select, oh, shift, select multiple windows. The AI is listening to me and it knows what I'm saying. That's amazing. Okay. So this is our story planner. This is something that we offer at the workshops, and it's basically something that I would recommend if you're also, again, just starting out, to print out or keep it digital, whatever it is, and kind of ask you all the important questions to help you on the journey of starting to develop a photographic story. And we're going to go into the details a little bit deeper. So starting somewhere from here, yeah. I'll just talk about each section or each point by point. So I think to begin with, as we said before, you need your idea. So to start working on your story, you need to answer some really basic questions before you begin. This is, who are your subjects? How can you reach them? And how to organize your meetings with them. So let's say that you've decided that you're doing a story about some local person that you have access to through a family or through a friend, and you reach out to your friend and you say, look, can you put me in touch, write a common email with CC or BCC or whatever, or give a phone number, and you contact that person. And the thing to consider is that, so you fill it in here. So if it is an individual story about an individual, so you write the name of this individual. If it is a story about a bigger subject, then you write the names of the different individuals you'll have to meet. Yeah. So if it's about like coronavirus in your hometown, then who will be your main subjects? Perhaps it will be the doctors and the nurses. Perhaps it will be the people who have survived. Perhaps it is some NGO workers. Maybe it's all of these people. So you need to really list it out. You need to consider which aspect of a story are you taking. Is it the bigger thing, or is it about certain individual or a certain class or employee type of people? So try to understand this and list it out here, write it down, so that when you are planning your, sorry, somebody's microphone. I'm just gonna mute everybody. Masha, can you mute everybody? Thanks. So yeah, try to understand, and like, probably as you develop the story, you'll have a better idea. There'll be like new subjects who will enter into the story. And so you can always, this is why I recommend printing it out, or maybe writing it into your notebook that you work with. But to keep adding those names if there are new names, to not, so I'll tell you later why this is important. So the next question is, how can you reach them, right? So also make a list of whether it's websites or email addresses that you find, or sometimes the cases I found an idea. Sorry, I'm just reading a question. Something related to identity or gender, but I belong to majority and privilege. So it feels like it's not my story to tell. I want to tell a simple story and more personal, but for me, it's way harder. Yeah, okay. I mean, the question here is, what angle will you take on the story, right? So if you want to talk about it from your perspective, well, then go to the people who you want to talk about them and ask them what they think about privilege and your position and how can you engage with them. No, that's, you still need to go through this process that I'm describing here. You still need to identify who your subjects are, how can you reach them, and how can you organize your meetings with these people. Whatever your story will be, there will be a really basic step-by-step process that you need to do. You know, whether it's talking about with other privileged people and interviewing them about their perspective on gender or identity or privilege or whatever, you know, you need to figure out what your angle is. But in order to even do that, I think filling this in will help you answer a lot of your personal questions. Does that make sense, Amal? So the reason that we also consider the second part of like how to organize these meetings, in order to organize the meetings, you probably need to communicate with your subjects already for some time, but what you need to understand is when is a good time for the story specifically for you to meet with these people. So it's not about when you have free time, right? It's about when is the story really happening. So you need to understand this, and you need to create a kind of a diary and say, okay, well, you know, if at this time there is a meeting or there is whatever the topic of your story might be, or at this time there is some kind of an important event that kind of really is relevant to the story or the situation I'm describing. So I need to find out how can I have free time on that day, and will they allow me to join, and how do I get access, and which permissions do I need to get, and who do I need to speak to. So this is why this how to organize the meetings, and then here in the organization part, make a list of these things and events. Yeah, so if it's about, again, I'll stick to one subject for clarity. So if it's about like coronavirus situation, just because it's happening right now, you know, if you're doing it from the point of view of nurses, then you need to understand when do they shift start, you know, what does it look like at night? Is there lots of people, or are they tired? Do they work long shifts? You know, photograph them when they come into work, and then when they're leaving 12 or 14 hours late. Try to understand, break it down like step by step, all the different things that you imagine happen to these people during the day. So I always say that to do this kind of mental exercise for yourself, so that you can then transfer it to a more complex story, I usually say, imagine a day of a hairdresser or a kindergarten teacher. Yeah, so they wake up in the morning, they have breakfast, they get ready, they get dressed, maybe they have children of their own, they take them to another school, and then they maybe drive or they take a bus. Do they look tired? Do they have to do some work late at night? Were they partying? What did they do the day before? And then what does the day look like? And when they finish, what do they do? So try to like really step by step imagine somebody else's life. Yeah, so first you imagine all the banal, boring, obvious stuff, and then the details of like all the interesting stuff that a person might do. Then you find that out once you're actually communicating with them. The reason that I say that that's important as well is that when you're out in the field, you should know what to expect so that you are not missing your really vital photographs of like to define a story. But also sometimes when you get to a photo shoot, what can happen is something so exciting is happening and you just focus on this one thing, and then you missed all the other stuff, and then you come home and let's say you don't have access again, or maybe you have one more access to this person, and you just wasted your opportunity to take the really important photographs, because some activities are really vital to a story. So if you have a list and you come to a shoot and you say, okay, I really need to get this shot and this shot and this shot because this will talk about this person or this situation. And then once you've done that, at least you can be calm and you can say, oh, okay, now I can look for creative, for fun, for whatever it is. But it's kind of important to not, you know, a story is still a story when you're thinking about it in terms of a book or a song or something. You know, there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the middle, like the beginning is we're getting introduced to the story. In the middle, all the actions happen. And then towards the end, we're wrapping up the idea, whatever it is. So the center is where all these kind of obvious important details are. So the you know, if it's a nurse, you know, is she tired? Is the hospital empty? Is there I don't know, yeah, are there any funny stories happening because the nurses and the doctors spending too much time in the hospital? Like, you really, we're seeing too many banal similar stories because nobody's really thinking, like everybody's kind of actually copying each other instead of actually doing the mental work, imagining, you know, what are the specific details of this specific hospital? What am I missing? What do I need to ask them? What time should I arrive? What is it that, instead of going and looking for the photos that we've already seen many times, we should be asking questions about what are the important things that are happening that are happening in this hospital or with this person. So you really want to keep asking this question and keep writing, keep adding to your list. When is a good time? When is something important happening? How can I get there? Whose permission do I need to get? Can I take time off? You know, if I'm working, is there another day that it might happen? You need to consider these things every time. So yeah, this is kind of related to both the things, the events, and the people. Things is in terms of actual like props of our life. You know, is there a particular building or a particular tool or a particular piece of clothing or some art or some time of the day or something? These are things you really should identify to try to, it's really nice to go into a story kind of with intuition and just photograph whatever comes along. But I think that these are the kind of stories that don't really that we have, and they don't shape into anything. We have many unfinished folders of work and we can't really structure them because I think they're lacking this structure. I mean, maybe you're wrong, maybe I'm wrong, and intuitively building stories works for you. You can tell me in the chat if that's true or not. But in my experience, people who don't sort of structure and plan a little bit, they end up with this body of work and they're like, and now what? So let's see. Hopefully this will help you. So as I was saying, make a list of things, events, people you would like to photograph, which are key to the story. When shooting, you will have also spontaneous things happen, but you also want to make sure that if there's things happening that are important, you can take photos of. If there aren't things happening, that you can still take photos. When you get home, you can review your work and you can check with your list and you can say, okay, I captured all the key elements. This is good. Now I can focus on something else. I can look for more depth. I can look for better portraits or something, but it will really help you. So here you can kind of go into, I think the topic, for example, for Amal, what are the issues that you would like to explore or research? You know, explore ways you can cover this topic. So, you know, if I think it's right that you say that you want to say something about identity or gender, but you belong to a majority and the privilege. So you write this down, right? You write down that there is a conflict between the privileged and the cis, or the normal, and the not privileged, the not normal. This is kind of your framing your problem. Once you have this framing, you can try to, in order to understand what's already been done and how this topic has been covered, because I think it's really important to understand what other people are saying as well. Perhaps might be interesting for you, or if anybody has said anything, because if you're going to be the first one, you're allowed to probably, well, you're kind of opening new territory. And so you're allowed to maybe make errors. You're allowed to get feedback. You're allowed to shoot stuff maybe more spontaneously and then go back to your subjects, go back to other people. You need to show your work. But I would really describe here, what are the topics and what are the conflicts? What is the, above the practical stuff, what is the social issues that you want to address with your story? So this will perhaps, again, I feel like a lot of these fields, they all address each other. Once you fill in a field, like here you say, oh, I want to address the issue of privilege. And then maybe your original idea of working with the gender non-conforming will change, and you'll actually want to interview the gender conforming more. If you're not writing these things down and it's just like this broad idea in your head, I don't think you will be able to answer those questions to yourself, and you will be stuck in this loop. I want to do a story, but I don't know how to tell it right. So just writing these things down and then going back and rereading, I feel, should help you. So this is setting. Where is this story taking place? This can be important or this can be not important. So this is in terms of whether you want to really localize it as this is happening in Indonesia, or this is happening in a small town, or this is happening in a big city, or this is happening in the countryside. So this can help you in terms of finding your photo, like the shots that you will be using. So do you want to show the big mega city with a cool landscape of like tall buildings and night lights and stuff, or do you want to show a kind of dead village with, you know, 5 goats and 3 old people? Like this will help you to add this additional dimension to your story. I feel like it's important to actually understand if the location plays a role or not in your story, because that's the other thing, is that there are so many stories that are about people, and we go into these like portraits that are just really close and intimate, and they're very nice, but they don't really tell us about the setting that this is in. And so in some way it can get kind of repetitive. We have portraits, and they're not, yeah, it's like I was saying, if you have a story idea, how to localize it, you know, maybe showing skyscrapers or highways, or yeah, I don't know, some barren landscape in the mountains or something, will just add that extra dimension. So I have a comment. We need to come with an attitude of curiosity and respect when approaching stories that are not our own, perhaps involving people and how they can have the power to direct or how the story is told. Acknowledging our bias and our privilege from the get-go, it can be a bit more respectful, I think. I think this is definitely true. The only thing is that in our workshops, just to clarify straight away, what my goal is to give you the most practical information. Obviously, the ethics of it, I feel like we're all, you know, converted here. I think we're all from the same church of equality and justice and and all that stuff. So I feel like this is obvious stuff that we are not saying, because we understand that there's privilege and power balances and all this kind of stuff. What I'm hoping is that once we understand that, we're not paralyzed and we're not creating work, you know, because the point is to understand that probably this kind of new storytelling hasn't been done yet, because we're just on this new road of more just photography, more representative photography. And we're doing it a little bit kind of intuitively. And so I hope my goal is to give you the tools to help you structure it and make it into an actual more complex story that could go into a really kind of a publications and magazines and all this kind of stuff that that is used to more structured storytelling. Does that make sense?
Kate, I totally agree with you, because it's my conflict, my problem, no? Being, no, feel really confident with myself, or with my idea, or my topics, or my aesthetical image, because we are so inflection of image around, and the photographers and Instagram and the wow, beautiful photo. And sometimes you think that maybe I have to invent something new to compete, but that is really like I'm stuck there. So you got a point. So I like you sharing that point, because I'm not alone now. So I feel like it's the same for others.
For sure. I feel like, I mean, definitely experimenting photography is this most wonderful medium where you can experiment, and it's so much more accessible than probably a lot of art mediums. It's much easier. I mean, you can do so much with a mobile phone, but the thing is that if you really want to be a storyteller, it's a little bit the same kind of stupid, boring ways that you have to consider that first you need to know the rules and then you break the rules. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
any story begins, like any story will still have the same kind of structure. It will have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There will be a social conflict. There will be a kind of a couple of characters. Once you know this process, once you're completely fluent and you're kind of flying through your subjects, break the rules, start your story with an end and end it with a beginning. You can do all these really fun and cool stuff, but what we do through our workshops is to give a structure to kind of really understand this old school way of approaching any subject at all, any subject, and telling the story through your own. But there will still be kind of basic building blocks. When you're building a house, there's always a good ground, solid walls, and a roof. This is just this, whether it's an ethical house and a greenhouse, or it's a really bad mansion and blah blah blah, doesn't really matter. The rules are the same. So just, I mean, yeah. So it's good to question the whole power balance and to question privilege and all that. But I feel like still, if you're answering these questions, yeah, if you're figuring out who are the main players, like how do you even understand what is privilege, and how does that even impact anybody's life? So when you understand, like here in your conflict part, about the privilege that people experience, then you need to describe in the events that you need to photograph what privilege looks like or what non-privilege looks like. You need to be able to visualize that or ask the question to your subjects and answer those questions, because probably you on your own, without considering these things, it will be really hard for you to recognize them. That's the other thing. Documentary photography and storytelling is a little bit of journalism. You need to ask questions, whether to yourself or to your subject or to your environment. But some of it is observation and the other part of it is questions. So where am I? Back here. Yeah, okay, no, that's later. So this part is not necessarily, I mean, the solutions and journeys has the subject undergone visible transformation. I don't believe that every single story will have a very clear conflict, or every story will have a clear solution or a clear transformation. This is just, there are so many different scenarios, there's so many different stories, and there's so many different ways to engage in photography that you can fill this in, you don't have to fill this in, but a journey or progression can mean, if you're photographing a family where there are gender issues being addressed, and if you spend, or maybe the question of privilege, if you're documenting privilege and you're addressing and you're having conversations with somebody, and then you're seeing them change and you're with them for 3 months or 6 months or something, maybe that transformation does happen. And it's again, it's a little bit like when you verbalize something, like with emotions, if you don't say anything, then they can build up. And if you speak to a friend and then you just say a few words and you're like, oh yeah, it was actually so simple, that was all that I felt. So looking at your work, re-looking, coming back to your work and really writing it down or saying it out loud can help you to understand the motif of your story. Or maybe sometimes I find, through having looked at many different projects, that people think that their story is about one thing, but actually when you look at their stories, the photos are about something completely different. And it's just like the narrative and the text just does not match the photographs at all. And I feel like that's partially because they didn't really do the work in advance of trying to understand, how do you actually document what you say you want to document? And this is due to just a lack of this, building blocks, the understanding of how you build a house or how you build a story. So the subject may transform, but it may not transform. I mean, the transformation, again, if we go back to the Corona story, let's say if you're working on it, like in the early days when it all happened, people were just photographing their streets and all the nice neighbors standing in front of their house and, doing something. But if you continue to document this, now everybody's kind of bored with that. No, nobody's standing at their windows and like waving and stuff. So you could have done one story at the beginning, but now if you keep taking photos, you can actually start to mix. So you would take like 2 pictures of these happy people by their doors, and then these like, you know, maybe at nighttime when everybody has their TV on and you just see the blue lights coming out of the windows. And then the next transformation will be something else. So the story can also evolve. You can work on the same story and it can change with every period, every 3 months or every year or whatever week. Yeah, you have to be able to follow the flow. Yes, but I feel like you also have a right to an agenda. No, like if you have a very particular idea, you can also do that. That's what I'm kind of saying. So it's just that if you're sticking to one single story for a long time, it will probably change. But if you're doing like a reportage kind of documentary story, probably you want to do 2 weeks, 1 month working on it, and then you just want to stop it. So how do you do the best with that? No, if you have only 1 month to work on a story, but you want it to be the best that it can be. So these things will help you either way. Yeah, the agenda can adapt, but you can also be just neutral and no agenda, just an observer. No, it's like with the coronavirus, I think it was quite easy to be just an observer, because I think we could see how our streets changed quite naturally, and there was not even anything we had to say when all of a sudden the trash started to appear with the masks and the gloves, and you know, in the shuttered shops and the empty streets. And then the summer came and people slowly started to come out and there were less masks, and then again the transformation. There's not even any analysis that you need to do about it. There's no complex agenda or anything. You're just observing. So stories will be so different. You need to kind of be aware of that also. Again, I feel like it helps if you're filling these parts in, you can see what kind of story it's going to shape into, because you might think that, so doing this kind of like building, you know, like when you're building a house, first you'll draw a plan and you'll measure how big the rooms will be. And so when you're planning on buying the materials, right, you're not just like, oh, okay, I think I need 2 meters. No, you need to have a plan. So here is the same. Then you can kind of imagine what the story will look like. And when you're in your process of building that story, you can always refer back to the plan and say, oh yeah, I'm on right track, or oh, something happened and this doesn't look what I thought it originally. So this is wait, yes, but there was a sort of way to predict people behavior, but maybe it is only here in the UK. Yeah, no, I don't think so. In Estonia, we were all really surprised by how the whole thing went down. So yeah, I think every place will be so different. Everybody was really surprised that people were so disciplined. Like when they brought the lockdown, people just disappeared for 3 weeks. Everybody was at home, was like, nope, not going out there. But now we were so relaxed. So first everyone was really surprised. They said, oh my God, what happened? You know, we can actually listen and do the best thing for ourselves. But then now we have a second wave and now nobody's listening. It's terrible now. So everybody's like, but we were so good in the spring. What happened? And nobody has the answer. So it really doesn't make any sense. People don't make okay, so you want to know about the grants. I mean, again, this is, I feel like talking about grants when you have not done like a deep, proper investigation or a story is probably really early, because so what do you need a grant for, right? It's like, do you need to travel somewhere far, or do you need to, you know, this is why I was saying the beginning that you start with is you start with what do you have access with? What kind of stories have you already been photographing? Do you have special friends or special jobs that you're interested? You know, if you're talking about identity, why does that bother you or interest you? Is there somebody in your community that is already dealing with those issues, or is there somebody who are against those issues? Like, what do you need money to begin this work with? Because I feel like right now money is really not the question. because once a story is at least started a little bit, once you identified, so writing a grant, for example, you will have to describe all of these things, the kind of that you've done the analysis, that you've done you envision what the story will look like, you understand how it can be published, whether it's better in an exhibition form or better in a publication form, in a magazine or a newspaper or a book. So in order to get a grant and to write an application that is not really a torturous experience, this kind of stuff needs to be done in advance, because we can write a lot of abstract applications that don't really go anywhere because they're too abstract, because we are kind of thinking that we are excited by this idea. But the people who review grants, they know really well when the idea has already formed and has like legs to stand on and when it hasn't. So in general, I think it depends very much what your experience and background is. So yes, you can start a project before it's funded. You can start a project, you can wait for funding, you can write grant applications and see if you get a grant, but I feel like in general, most photographers that are being published, they're working on stories despite whether they have money or not. They're investing their own money, and then they might get a big publication or might get a big exhibition, and that will pay back a lot of what they've spent on it. So the world of photography right now is kind of, it's sad to say, but it's a little bit like philanthropic work. You're telling stories at your own expense, and then maybe somebody might sort of recognize you for that. I can also say that when you find a story that you have started working, that you understand the process, you can actually speak to funders in a much more confident way. So you can actually address them more. You can also get some value from the experience, because if, let's say, you write a grant application for a story that you've already developed or starting to develop and you get rejected, you can actually reach out to the funders and you can say what went wrong, and you can get feedback from them because you feel comfortable about your project. You're sure that it's going to be it's going to work. You've already done all the, like, the plan of the building is already laid out. You know who you need to talk to, you know how much money. You're not really imagining this stuff. Does that make sense? Because I feel a lot of stories are driven by emotion, and so writing grants that are still too abstract, I feel like it's a waste of time. I mean, I can also just say from personal experience, early on when I was starting, I was doing this thing where I had, 10 years ago, I had these great ideas, but I had no idea how to develop them. I just thought the subject was really cool. And I would write these long applications. I would write these essays and grants. And then I'd be like, but why did I do that? I like, I didn't actually know the right people that I needed to contact. I didn't really have a vision of what is the best medium to publish it in. So once I started to understand the sort of landscape, it became much easier to write grant applications, and it became much easier to ask for feedback, and it became much easier to get to get stories published or something. So I feel like it's a good question, but that's a session. You have to get to know your readers. No, I don't think it's about your readers. I think it's about you specifically. You have to get to know your work. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, if your work is really great, then you feel really confident about it, and then you just kind of feel confident of pestering somebody, of trying to get money for it. But you can't do that when it's just like a general abstract idea. So what I'm hoping that, even by writing this, answering these silly questions here on these 2 pages, if you're writing a grant application, once you've already at least filled all of this in, it will be that much easier for you to answer the questions that they're asking you. So it's not about the readers, it's about the story, that you've lived with it, that you feel it, that you understand it, that it's not just a cool idea that you have. You know what I mean, Sonia?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Because yeah, I feel that's kind of the beginning of a story. Really feeling it. So the next question, this is purely a structural thing. No, it's like, do you build your house out of brick or out of wood? Like purely structural. So is your story dynamic or is it static? So dynamic means that there will be some kind of action, there will be different times of the day, there will be different people, there will be static means basically it's like a series of portraits that are more symbolic and illustrative of a subject. Yeah, so these are kind of things that we should consider when we're considering our topic, and this is why it comes a little bit later in the list, because you need to first identify the general idea, but you need to understand, you know, is it okay if you just illustrate like static photographs of portraits of different people, or do you really need to add some kind of energy? You know, that also will mean that maybe you want to have some more smudgy artistic photographs, or you know, this kind of stuff will help you to even find your visual aesthetic also, you know, once you understand where the story is going, what is it doing. So if we go back to, because now we have some kind of a project idea, this privilege and gender issues. Yeah, so is this dynamic or static? I feel like, for example, it could be treated in two ways. In a static way, it could be a series of portraits of people who experience um, some kind of hardship due to their identity or something. And so they could be really portraits that you could then navigate with them, how they pose, how they look, what they are trying to say. This would be a static story because this type of photography would be supported by the captions, by the stories that they tell you through like interviews and, you know, through your text. A dynamic story would be something that would kind of change, where probably you would meet them first time and you would take a few photographs, and the photographs would be maybe a little bit more reserved and they would be more shy about what they show you, and so it might be like a portrait first, and then you meet them again and maybe they take you to some meeting or they take you to their private houses or some meetings or what, I don't know, whatever it might be. And so you have this like growing depth as you go deeper, deeper, deeper into the story. There'll be different elements that will build it up. And how can you show it? Well, that's the question of, again, identifying whether it will be different times of the day. Maybe there will be some kind of symbology, you know, where you might, if we're talking about reproductive rights, you know, is it something about the way that you will look at color or the way that you will look at certain items? You know, like high heel shoes most probably represent women, but it, you know, today it can represent something else. I don't know. This is really a kind of, again, very, very banal examples, but you should consider, you should also try to think, what are the what are the symbols in your story, like what can signify what in this specific topic or in this specific problem or issue. Does that make sense? The difference between dynamic and more static kind of stories. Owner. Who's that? Does that make sense? Yeah, all good. You are muted, hold on. Yeah.
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 Okay. I prefer talking and then
Sure.
write because I want to share with others immediately about that, about statics, dynamic. So I know we are talking about story planning, okay? Story in general. My question is, what do you think about no serious project, like a single photo?
Mm-hmm.
You know, some photographer produce like a single picture with a story for sure, inside or emotional, or you know, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
beautiful light or concept or you know, creative in general. So my question is that if we can also apply kind of process like you sharing right now in a single or couple image. So what do you think about that specific planning? how you can propose kind of, you know. So
Yeah.
it's really different. I know. I don't want to broken your plan because it's so different.
Not at all.
If you can not identify, but you find here some specific point to make it a single or couple image, for
So
example.
just to understand, if
You understand the question? I'm
not
sorry.
sure, so let me ask you back. So do you mean if you already have the images and you want to put them into a story, or if you want to make a single image and that is a single story?
Yeah, that's the second.
The second. So in terms of a single image, I mean, this is a kind of, the way that I understand it personally is this kind of iconic image. In the past, it was very popular to shoot these
Because
single.
sometimes, you know, photographer can make a portfolio just with a
Exactly.
single picture.
Yeah. So for a really long time, I was a little bit the same. I was really into iconic pictures,
Okay.
but I was very bad at stories. I did like my photo, like my portfolio. So I would have a series of photos on a single subject, but the story was not so much there because it was kind of like full of these photos. But like seriously, I was once in a competition where I had to watch live as they judged the photos, and there was a very famous photographer who said, you know, like it was really nice, but great memory. He said, but you know, these photos are really nice, but the competition was about a story, and everybody else on the jury said, but there's no story. And I sat there and I was confused, and I'm like, but I'm a photographer. I'm just supposed to make good photos. You find the story. It's all written there.
You were confident already there.
No. I was still a student. It was really early days. It was really, and that's why before I became working photographer, I had already spent many years taking photos randomly, which is why I teach this now, because I was this person that would look for that one photo. It didn't have any of those profound meanings. It was just really visually beautiful, but kind of on its own, it's like, what does it all say? You know? So now, I mean, I'm still into iconic images if you can do that. So this is a different thing. This is about structuring a story. You know, you definitely need really, really strong photos. You want to open with a very strong photo. You want to close with a very strong photo. And in the middle, there should be some really strong photos to keep the person engaged. And like, we're still talking about aesthetic visuals, right? But a story is about, like, truly, if you're working on a story, it's about so much more. You know, it's about feelings, it's about triggering these symbols and emotions and understanding something about a person. And that might not always look spectacular. You know, if a person's life is not like fully spectacular, you don't abandon that story just because there's none of that spectacular imagery. I used to do that. I will take out photos that I didn't think were good, and that meant that my story was like, I often talk of a story like a human body. So you have the skeleton, and then the meat and the muscles and the bones and the skin and the clothes. So my story was the skeleton with makeup on it. No, because like I had these really good looking photos, but it was like the rest of the body wasn't there.
You know why I'm asking you like that? Because I'm not documentary photographer. I'm not.
Yeah.
That came from my my stuff, but like we will talk about that later. Okay, so I just want to know your point. Kind of
it's changed.
like in the workshop as well. If you have this moment, like okay, we are talking about storyteller and story. Sometimes the like I used to say iconic photo, no, like there's a story as well. Just one picture. It's just what I want to know.
Yeah. I mean, a single iconic photo can definitely be very meaningful also, but
I know. So, yeah, it's important. I think so.
sure,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. I'm definitely still for absolutely both.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry if I interrupt you. I just
No, not at all.
Vision about it.
No, it's good to have a discussion.
Okay.
Maria asks, is it that most spectacular photos are taken by chance? Yes and no. Depends. Really depends so much on the story and the situation. So some situations they're like some locations and some people and some stories, they are just so visual. So this is the other thing, maybe, you know, some stories, they are much harder to develop into the visual language. They are not so, you know, the for example, working in our country in Estonia, there's like really bad light, there's hardly any of it, you know, there are no colors, so visually it's a very different space. And so I know photographers, I don't know if any of you know Alex Webb is an American photographer, and he's basically a photographer of iconic images, but he only shoots in Mexico and Cuba, where there's beautiful backgrounds, beautiful colors, beautiful people, beautiful nature. So it's really hard to not get like really amazing photo time after time. And he captures it in a kind of little bit like Steve McCurry way, where it's everything is so exoticized and so so he can definitely capture photo after photo and it will be spectacular. But if you give him a story, you ask him to work on a story, he will probably chase the images rather than the meaning. I have this, I mean, nothing bad about Alex Webb or Steve McCurry at all. Not to say anything bad about like their images, but in terms of how they treat a story, like profound meaning is probably not something that I would go there for. You know, I'd go there for inspiration in terms of how to match color and people and landscape and light. Minimal photos, also not so much, because we have a lot of like visual pollution. So it's not like it's, yeah, it's a very mediocre kind of, but I've done some stories here and they're all right. They're, I mean, definitely not like my, um, they're not my spectacular kind of iconic that I could label my photos, but there are some okay, depending again on the location. You know, I did a story about an abandoned town and that was quite nice, but the location in itself was quite unusual, so that helped. You know, if it's just in my hometown is so drab. Definitely not a location for spectacular photographs, nor minimalist. It's just like meh. Right. So
Can I just not expand, but just make a consideration about what you were saying?
sure.
I live in the mainland of Venice.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever been here, you know it's very different from Venice.
Yes, I was very shocked.
They call it the parking lot city
Yeah.
for a reason.
Uh-huh.
So there are all these, condos, and it's quite great. There is some beauty in it. But I used to live in Venice before. So for me, it was kind of like being grounded. Like you've done something bad, so you're going to go away from, heaven, which was Venice, and stay there in the ugly place. And so for me, it was really, really difficult to start taking pictures here. And right now, for example, I have two Instagrams. One is for the pretty things.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is for the pictures of my town.
Mm-hmm.
And the most popular, of course, is for the pretty things. So
Right.
very sunny and beautiful Venice and gondolas and all that kind of jazz. But for a Mestre, when I take pictures here, they're ugly. I mean, some are pretty. They're all black and white and kind of grungy because that's how I see this town.
Mm-hmm.
But I struggle a little bit to give dignity to the place where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to be mature enough from a mind perspective to be able to go beyond what is just beauty
Mm-hmm.
and also aesthetic, if you like, and give dignity to the place where I live, to the people that who live here, in the right way. I struggle a little bit, and also sometimes I post things and then I'm ashamed and I just erase everything.
Yeah. So,
So
but this is, I mean, this goes back to this planner that we have, right? The question is, so what does dignity mean in Mestre or Mestre, how do you say it? Mestre. What does it mean? Who are the people that represent that? What are the places that represent that? What time of the day? What kind of activities? Like, you're right now, it sounds very abstract. I don't know what you mean by that. If you're trying to take the same kind of beautiful photos as of Venice, in Venice, we don't need to know the people because all we care about is the canals and the streets and the light and the color and blah, blah. In another place, the meaning of those words is completely different. Different building material makes that up. So you need to identify what are those things, and then you go in search of those things and you photograph them.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing, but I'm not sure because I see it as a very grungy and kind of dark and kind of sad city. Then I end up, using certain type of light and black and white, a bit strong and grainy. So maybe I am selecting only those images that reflect my way of seeing the city.
Yeah.
Maybe there is more, maybe that's enough. I don't know. I feel a little bit stuck and I'm not sure how to unravel this situation.
So if you should try to take photos in color, you need to identify, okay, you need to try a completely different process. So to take photos in color, what does that mean? What are the things that will work in color? Because obviously, like in my hometown, it's pretty gray. I need to identify those pieces that are colorful. And I actually have some things that are quite colorful because those things allow for them to be like that. And that's also that my newsfeed currently is really schizophrenia because like my city is 4 different places. And that's also interesting, that's kind of, so I treat each meeting with my city differently. So some photos will be quite grungy and quite miserable, and other photos will be like really spectacular nature, and I'm completely like, wow, this is what we live in the middle. And then other photos will be some really quirky architectural stuff. So later on, you can maybe put that into some bigger project, but challenge yourself, like identify what you're doing now and how can you do the opposite, and what are the different elements that you're not doing right now, like, because it sounds to me that you're thinking if it's not Venice, then it's just grunge or something, but there must be a middle something.
Yeah,
in the middle. And as I said, maybe that just means more people, more diversity, more indoor stuff, more events, more, those mornings when there's sunshine. You need to like figure out what are the moments that you're not seeing that would give that new feeling. Yeah.
May I say something? Just to close the discourse before you start again.
Yeah.
I just wrote that confidence comes from doing. So what I feel is very useful when you don't know how to deal with a certain environment, both technically and maybe you are not sure about the topic on how, or maybe how to deal with the topic. What I found very useful is to look at the history of the city, look back and see how the personality of this environment, because environments have personalities. So probably if you look back on what has been already done, what is has already written down, you will find many answers. Like in my city, Palermo, all the lights in night times are orange. So every single photo will be orange and black. So probably what I found interesting is that this orange is very connected, for example, to the okay, there is this Monte Pellegrino, which is a little, it is called mountain, but it's not, it's very small. When at a certain time of the year, when the sun goes down, it becomes purple pink. So there is a color connection between the city and the environment. So try this kind of connections. It will help out a lot. That's my personal opinion. Yeah. Thank you for the space.
So we have a new face. Hello, you put a camera on. Yeah, so we actually have like, yeah, 15 minutes left before we have a short break and before we go into another workshop. So I'm just gonna go a little bit faster now. So, I mean, the audience part is something that I recommend to consider as well, because no audience is exactly the same. No audience responds to everything the same. So, for example, if we go back, Sinu, to your question of like, are you shooting this town and do you want to show this the beauty or alternative beauty of this place for the local people? Are you embarrassed in front of the local people or the foreigners? Is it about the people who have lived there all their life, or is it about people like you who have moved there from another place? To try to understand slightly. Or the issue of privilege in gender and representation issues, like who do you want to speak to? This will help you identify the aesthetic you'll go with. It will help you identify the kind of key players that are important. It will help you identify all kinds of stuff. So, and this will also later help you get it published. If you kind of consider this in advance, uh, then you'll know that, okay, maybe perhaps this story is not really good for, I don't know, like the main newspaper, but it's really good for a niche magazine, or country, or architecture, or social, or some, what I'm saying. So like, to understand who your audience is will help you understand how to speak to them so that they actually get you. So it's also a little bit a question of like, do you want to be really symbolical and artistic and like lots of smudges and lots of shadows and kind of symbols, or do you want it to be quite straight, quite understandable, like portraits and actions and all these things? They play a role in how well the viewer will understand your message. Because at this point I feel like photography is not purely I mean, of course, it is like an artistic outlet, but it also has a really good purpose. And if you understand how to use this tool, then you can actually reach that purpose. You can reach that goal that you have. So it makes me think a little bit of I don't know if you know, Amy Vitale is an Italian American photographer, or only Italian. She's been photographing for a decade now, pandas. And so she had in the past been photographing kind of travel and humanitarian issues, and now she's just been doing pandas, and she photographs the cutest pandas because she wants to save them. Her mission is quite clear, and they're so cute. There's none of that artistic kind of, she used to be much more in that sense. I think, if I'm looking at the work, it was much more creative and playing with the medium. But I think it's come to a point where she's like, I want the photos to be as clear and as understandable for any viewer. So understanding what your goals and your audience are is really important. I'm giving you these examples that I hope that you can sort of illustrate
I
those
never
concepts.
asked myself who I was talking to, and I think it's a very powerful question to find an answer to.
Yeah, of course. Because photography is still a language, right? So how do you use it? It's a little bit like if we take English, we have the British accent, 25 of them, and we have 25 Irish accents, and if I'm from one of those countries and I speak with one of those accents, probably most people won't understand me. But if I really want the people to understand me, maybe I'll try to speak clearer or something. So visual photography, the visual language of photography is kind of similar. What's your goal with it? If it's purely as a self-expression of artistic nature, do whatever you want. If you have some kind of a story that you're trying to say, then you have to combine your artistic expression plus the audience, plus the story, plus the subjects, plus the history that already exists. You need to be a little bit aware of that, of what's been done and what you're building on top. So goal and key messages. Yeah, that's that kind of final part, which will again help you to go back and revise perhaps all the other questions. Is, what are you trying to achieve? Why are you telling this story personally? Like, who are you to do this? Why do you care about it? Should you be the ones telling it? And if you're not, but you still want to, which is also possible, you have every right to do any story. How do you treat it right then? What are the limitations that you have, and what are possibly the benefits, what are of your situation that could allow you to do it differently in a new way, refreshing, and so on. what do you want, what do you want the audience to know, feel, or do? You know, you can actually take photos in a way that leaves an audience with some kind of a key message or a feeling, or, you know, they might actually want to act on something. This will help you decide also on your aesthetic. It will help you decide on the kind of key activities or people that you photograph. um, you know, because again, if we're talking about, back to like concrete examples, if we're talking about coronavirus, yeah, and if you want the people to start wearing masks, maybe you need to be really brutal and show them the really large numbers of, I don't know, deaths or suffering, people crying or something like that. You know, like this is this connection of like symbology, that if somebody's crying, something bad happened, I want to avoid that. You want to leave that feeling with the people. If you want to say something about the environment, like let's stop throwing away masks or something, then there was a really great project early on Instagram. There's some guy, I don't remember his name, unfortunately now, there's so many of them. But he was photographing the thrown away masks on the streets, like stuck in trees, in, you know, in playgrounds everywhere, and he made these like boards with hundreds of these masks. It was quite impactful just how many of them there were that he would photograph on his walks or something. So there's all these different ways to treat any story, and there's so many angles to approach it from. And the notes part is basically once you were working on your story, I guess you'll be meeting some people. You maybe want to keep some notes about something that somebody said that you want to maybe research further, or a note about, you know, maybe you missed this photograph today, you need to go back to the same place or try another time of day or whatever it is. Notes, I mean, I assume most people here when they work, they have a notebook and they're keeping notes about their work, people they've met, names, dates, ages, I don't know, whatever. Yes, you keep notes, notebooks. I have loads of notebooks for every story. You keep notebooks? Anybody?
I used to.
Huh?
I used to, then I got lazy.
Okay. It's supposed to be the other way around. The more you work, the more evolved it is. um, right. So this is the, yeah. So just to go back here, we have 5 minutes or so, so we can have a little break. So I recommend, as I said, make a list. But finally, when you're working, so there's so many other parts that we haven't even really gotten to because this is really big, obviously. I'm trying to give you the really actionable stuff that if tomorrow you were to go out, you would take this document, you know, you have an idea, you write the title and you start to identify all the key players, and then you went out and you shot for one day, you come back home, now you have some work, right? What do you do next? So one of the things that I propose, again, depending very much on the kind of story, if it's a static story, it's slightly different how you would edit it. But if it's a dynamic story with different people, different actions, different time of the day, normally I recommend a kind of review of your work. And what I propose is looking at very practical things. Do you have a variety of shots? Like, do you have wide angle? Do you have mid shot? Do you have close-ups? Do you have details? Because when you're working on a story, I often find that there are stories that are like mid shot, mid shot, mid shot, mid shot, mid shot, mid shot, and I'm just looking at the same distance all the time. I feel I'm never getting closer or further away from the subject. So your subject is alive, you know, it's like a friend. Sometimes you're far away from them, you see them coming towards you, sometimes you're sitting next to each other, sometimes you're, you know, so in the story it's a little bit like that. It's like spending time with the person. It's just that it's not you doing it, it's the photographer doing it. So you want to make sure that you're giving us that feeling of the different proximity that we may have to the subject or the topic or the concept or whatever. Make sure that you have things that are not just portraits, that there are things that belong to the people, the houses, the interiors, you know, all the elements that make up a story, again, as though you're getting to know a person or a situation. In terms of portraits, again, all very, very practical. I'm a very practical girl. There are different types of portraits. We should use this wealth of techniques that we have in a story. So we can have environmental portraits, which is a person in their place working on the whatever, whether they are working on dancing, entertaining, or in love, or whatever it is. We can have post portraits. The post portraits allow us some freedom to make a more kind of statement. Yeah, so we could actually choose the location. This is in documentary photography. A post portrait is the only thing we're allowed to pose. So, to see set up, because obviously the rest of the stuff we're just documenting. Yes. But a portrait, you could ask a person to stand or sit in a particular way and, convey a particular emotion. And then in action, so it's not necessarily the same as environmental, because it could be like a runner. Examples: a runner on a field, this is an environmental portrait, but a runner running, like blurred and smudged, this is an in action portrait. So you could have a variety of these portraits in a single story, and I think that that makes it richer, and again makes us feel more connected, as though we've spent time with this person or a situation. And then reviewing your photos, kind of final thing, I think like Alice already touched on it in terms of the time of day or special part of the year. I think a lot of the time the photos are always in that same kind of quality of light. It's either like midday when we have time, or maybe it's indoors, so it's always this top light. Maybe if you're shooting indoors in the evening, maybe switch off a light, maybe add an additional light, maybe use a flash, maybe ask for, for example, for a portrait, ask the person to go outside and, try to capture different parts of the day that matter to the story, but also try to capture different light quality and intensity and color, make the story a little bit more rich. Like when the person comes home and it's late and it's dark outside, maybe that's a good time for a portrait or something, a different way of seeing that person. And it just makes it a little bit more interesting as well, I feel. So this is how to review this material that you've done the work, you've kind of put stuff together, you come home in the evening, you're like, okay, I should have a look. Did I capture a variety of situations or a variety of portraits? And then day by day, you're building. Every day you take some new photos, and every day you should compare this day to the day before and say, okay, now I have way too many mid shots. Maybe I really need to get closer, or I'm too far away. You need, like, this helps you to identify how connected you are also with the subject yourself, how close or how far away you are. So finally, I propose this kind of, again, we use this in our workshops when we're learning from the start, but I propose a kind of assessment when you're looking at your work to be really kind of abstract and to be really not emotionally connected, but try to imagine as a viewer who's looking at your story for the first time, if it's not a static story, what kind of angles, is there a variety of angles, a variety of light and color, a variety. So angles is, right, it's different from the wide, narrow, close up and so on. Variety of angles means from the top, from the bottom, from eye level, from, all these different ways of engaging with the world. Variety of situations that the subject is in. So it actually opens up the complexity of their life. And then the last one, of course, is if the story really tells me something new that I didn't know. This is a really hard thing to achieve, I feel, but it's still something we can strive for. So yesterday we were showing photos of from the students from our workshops in Shatila refugee camp. And there was a story about the scarves from behind, because the women are uncomfortable, Arab women or Muslim women are not really comfortable of being photographed and their photos being shared on social media. And so the lady decided to photograph the scarves. And somebody said that this is not something they've ever seen or thought about before, that these colors of their head scarves mean something different every day. And so it's trying to identify, like, what is your unique perspective onto something that you can bring to a story. And if you can achieve that, with a single photograph or with a single kind of feeling, that's to me already is a successful story. So maybe you haven't broken the social norms yet, but you said something new, something personal, something that hasn't yet been said. And whether people respond or not to that, that's not necessarily fully your responsibility. At least you tried, you said something authentic. So that's kind of it, I'd say, for now. That's a lot of information. I hope it's somewhat useful. Oh, Tracy's here. Maria from femLENS here, she's just shared a survey. It would be really nice if everybody could fill in the survey just to understand if this was useful or not, or or if you were looking for, I don't know, more sort of ethical, spiritual conversation rather than the more practical. But as I said, we're definitely into the practical solution finding. And the next workshop, welcome, Tracy.
Hi, Kata. Hi, everyone. Hi, Alice.
Hi, Kate, Tracy, sorry.
That's okay.
So we will be doing also a kind of a practical identification of structural problems in terms of access to knowledge and information and publication and stuff. So I'm just going to take a quick break, 5 minutes, because I've been talking for 2 hours. But everybody feel free to hang out and chat and leave